Lucas Vargas Terra was born on October 19, 1986, in Bahia, Brazil. He was the third child of José Carlos Terra and Marian. His older brothers, Carlos Jr. and Carlos Felipe, welcomed the new family member with open arms. José Carlos was a business administrator born in Rio Grande do Sul. Due to his work, he traveled constantly, which made him miss his family. In 1989, Marian decided to move permanently to the capital of Bahia with José Carlos and their children. Later, they lived in Rio de Janeiro. José Carlos and Marian were people of great faith and raised their children with those values. Lucas learned from a young age that things should be shared with everyone. He took special pleasure in helping others and caring for them. As he grew up, he further demonstrated this inherent vocation for service. According to those close to him, his faith was paramount. He repudiated lies and anything that strayed from the truth. The Word of God deeply influenced him, and his behavior was marked by transparency. Despite his small size, he could transform sadness into joy and smiles. He expressed himself as someone who knew everything and felt entitled to give his opinion on any subject because he placed the Eternal Father above all else. He was a boy convinced of his faith and read the Bible every day. Whenever he saw people on the streets while out walking with his mother, Lucas would say that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up to help heal people. His desire to become a doctor coexisted with his wish to grow within the church and eventually hold a position as a bishop. In June 2000, at 13 years old, while studying at a school in the Copacabana neighborhood, his mother was called by the school directors about an incident involving Lucas and two other children who accused him of something unpleasant in the boardroom. Marian, Lucas, the director, and the two accusing boys gathered together. While his mother defended him, Lucas remained silent, attentive to everything said, with the calm and serenity of an innocent. At a certain point in the meeting, the director, frustrated by Lucas's attitude, urged him to defend himself. The boy's response was surprising. He looked sternly at them and said, "The righteous do not justify themselves." After saying this, he remained silent and was exonerated of the accusations. Lucas's life changed at the beginning of 2001, when his family made plans to move to Italy for work. Marian was the first to leave because she got a job in a steakhouse run by her sister in Parma, 465 kilometers from Rome, the Italian capital. She had to travel soon because the job needed her immediately. However, her husband and children had a strong attachment to Brazil and wanted to spend more time in their native country to say goodbye to their friends. They also wanted to visit Salvador, where all their family ties were. For that reason, they agreed that Carlos and the two youngest children would embark for Italy after the European winter. However, the plans changed drastically on January 5th of that year. José Carlos and the two younger boys left Rio de Janeiro for Salvador, even though 14-year-old Lucas was not very happy about the trip, since he had many friends in Rio. As an obedient son, he accepted his parents' decision. After traveling 1,700 kilometers on a road trip, Lucas, his father, and his brother Felipe arrived in Salvador. There, they stayed at Gervasio's house, a brother of José Carlos, and his wife Dilsa, who had 5 adorable children: Moisés, Sarah, Raquel, Gabriela, and Israel. From that moment, Lucas began to attend the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in the neighborhood of Santa Cruz, since he did not want to be far from his religion and his activities in the temple. He volunteered for tasks ranging from the easiest to the most difficult. Due to his great charisma, he attracted people and demonstrated with his actions that he was a born leader. Everything seemed to be well organized in the church. The group of young people was large, and to facilitate the tasks, all teams were created. The boys were divided into 12 groups called tribes, each with a chief who was called a tribal leader. Lucas had many duties, Among them was to attract as many young people as possible to join the church. Shortly after, Lucas was allowed to lead one of the tribes. Enthusiastic about gaining more followers for his faith, he worked with great care and managed to maintain his tribe with constant growth. His efforts bore fruit, and his tribe became the one with the largest number of followers. As an encouragement for his good work, he received several prizes, such as a box of chocolates, which he shared with the members of his group. Due to his great qualities, he was assigned a new position as a worker, whose function was to assist the pastor during religious services and take care of the routine within the church. To assign him this new role, all the members of the temple needed to agree, and so it happened. One of those who was most pleased with Lucas's appointment as a worker was the auxiliary pastor, Silvio Roberto Galiza, 21 years old, who had the nickname of the Secretary. He had been transferred from another congregation due to problems that were never clarified or made public. The only explanation given was that Pastor Silvio had behaved inappropriately. Every day he became closer to Lucas with the excuse that the boy had so many future ambitions and that being close to him would help him learn more about everything concerning the functions within the church. Practically, the man monopolized all of the teenager's time. Over time, Silvio's inappropriate behavior, for which he had been transferred, began to become evident. He became possessive and did not want Lucas to get close to anyone. He wanted all the boy's attention and controlled his steps. The religious attitude generated some concern, but when they asked him the reason for so much concern about having Lucas always within reach, the pastor responded that he needed to have him close due to the teachings he was transferring to him. Thus, he managed to get the boy to accompany him more than his own shadow. At the beginning of February of that year, 2001, Lucas began to become romantically interested in a 17-year-old girl who also worked as a worker in his church. Although she was a little older than him, she was his first love. As soon as he found out about the relationship, Silvio forbade her to approach him. That girl and any other, making his feelings of jealousy and possession more than clear. At the end of the same month, Lucas and another young man, whose identity was not revealed, stayed late into the night, resolving some administrative matters with Pastor Silvio in the temple. Under the false concern that it might be too dangerous for them to return home, the man suggested that they spend the night there. The parents were informed, and it was fine with them. They considered the church to be the safest place after their homes. While the other teenager stayed asleep on a church pew with only a pillow, Silvio invited Lucas to sleep in his room and his bed. It was not known if the boy was disturbed that night, but the situation alone was enough to cause an uproar among the members of the congregation. The incident was referred to the superiors to avoid scandals. To close the matter, the religious authorities decided again to transfer Silvio to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in the Rio Bermelo neighborhood. The only thing they were interested in was avoiding unnecessary repercussions that could tarnish the image of the temple. Lucas's father, for his part, never found out what happened. However, Pastor Silvio, bordering on impudence, continued to attend church services despite having been transferred, arguing that no one could stop him from entering the place as a simple faithful. It was obvious that his only interest was to watch over Lucas, for whom he already had a total obsession. On March 21st, Lucas woke up at 6 in the morning. As always, he was very excited and happy. He brushed his teeth, put on cologne, and dressed in a long-sleeved white shirt, blue dress pants, a black belt, black socks and shoes. At 6:30, he left the house, smiling, and told his father that he would return at 1 in the afternoon to have lunch punctually. At the scheduled time, Lucas arrived at the family residence to eat and talk about his activities. He had a quick lunch and said he needed to go to the temple in the Pituba neighborhood. He left and returned home at 5 in the afternoon, changed his shirt, hugged his father, and left half an hour later. At the temple and attended a youth meeting as usual. That night, he was happy to be with his group and to be able to help many kids find a new path away from drugs, marginality, crimes, or sadness. At the end of the activities, at approximately 9 at night, Lucas was on the outskirts of the religious complex, talking with some friends and his girlfriend when he was called by Silvio. The always helpful and obedient teenager never dared to object, much less disobey the order of a superior. He said goodbye to everyone and left with the man, who invited him to a prayer evening that was taking place in the church. The deadline for Lucas to be home was 9:30 at night. On the few occasions when he was forced to stay out late, he always called his father to inform him where he was. Because of this, his father began to worry since more than 20 minutes had passed after the scheduled time, and the boy had neither arrived nor called. The man changed his clothes, and when he was ready to go out to look for him, the phone rang. It was after 10 at night. On the other side of the line, Lucas's voice was heard, telling him that he was with Pastor Silvio for a prayer purpose. Carlos calmed down again, thinking that the church was the safest place for his son to be apart from home, but he was very wrong. The first thing the next morning, he was worried because Lucas had not arrived. The father went to look for him. First, he passed by the church where the teenager attended, but they told him that Pastor Silvio had taken him to the temple in the Rio Bermelho neighborhood. When he went to the place, Silvio told him that the boy was not there. He stated that he had left him at night at the bus stop in the Valle d'Aduijaros neighborhood and gave him money to go to the church of Pituba. Lucas's father complained to him for having taken the teenager there without his authorization. When the distraught man arrived at the place and asked Fernando da Silva, who was the pastor in charge of the region where his son was, he replied that he did not know and that he had not seen him the night before. José Carlos questioned him because he was responsible for taking care of the young people. However, due to the lack of response from the religious man, he left upset and walked aimlessly with a photo of his son in his hand, asking if anyone had seen him, but there was no sign of him. The man returned to the Temple of Santa Cruz, where he remained sitting in front until the end of the afternoon, in the hope that the minor would appear. At 6 in the afternoon, several of the man's friends and his other son, Felipe, arrived to see if Lucas had appeared, but the boy seemed to have been swallowed by the earth. The father got into his car and, in the company of friends and family, went to report the disappearance at the police station. However, the police officers on duty said they had to wait 48 hours to file the report. In those days, there was no immediate search law. José Carlos left the police station irritated and went to visit the city's hospitals. The task lasted until after 3 in the morning, but Lucas still did not appear. Eager to find even the slightest trace of his son to bring him back home, José Carlos returned to the church, where he stayed until the next morning. At 5:30 in the morning, he met his son's best friend, and they went to talk to Silvio again. This time, the religious man's version was different from the one given the day before. He told José Carlos that he had left his son in the Chapada del Rio Rojo neighborhood. José Carlos accused him of lying and was sure that something bad had happened to Lucas. He later said that he felt like hitting the pastor but restrained himself and returned to the church where Lucas attended. He made posters with his son's photo at a printing press and began to stick them everywhere, determined to find him. While he was doing that, his phone rang. The call was from a temple worker stating that the police had found a burned body in a vacant lot on the avenue next to the church where Silvio worked. Carlos found the call strange because no one other than his son had his cell phone number, and he did not know the supposed employee who called. Despite that, he went to the indicated place accompanied by the owner of the printing press. When they arrived, the owner told him to stay in the car and that he would go to see if the information was true. After a few minutes, he returned and told him that there was a body, but it did not look like Lucas. In reality, the man did not dare to tell him the truth. 3 police officers arrived at the site at 11:30 at night. 2 alleged witnesses told the officers that they had seen a fire and then saw several men fleeing at high speed. The body found was inside a box on Vasco da Gama Avenue and completely burned. Even with the hope that his son was alive, José Carlos returned to the printing press to search for more posters. After another night of insomnia, on the morning of March 24th, he continued walking through the streets looking for Lucas. With no results, he went to the Universal Cathedral to speak with the person in charge, but they told him that he was not there. He remained there for 9 hours, waiting for someone to attend to him and give him an explanation, but this did not happen, and he left the place disgusted. The father suspected that everyone was involved in the strange disappearance of his son, and that is why they appeared cold and indifferent to his anguish and despair. On Sunday, March 25th, José Carlos went to the temple again, accompanied by his son's girlfriend. There, he found armed security guards who prevented him from approaching Bishop Paulo Rodrigues. He went down with the girl to the basement of the religious complex, where Silvio was also protected by several representatives of the clergy. José Carlos again asked him about the boy, but Silvio refused to answer. Instead, the bishop called José Carlos a liar and ordered him to leave the room. The father continued his fight to find Lucas. For some time he was subjected to terrible humiliation, mainly by representatives of the Universal Church, who gave false clues about the child's whereabouts and even complained to him when he spoke to the media. He received dozens of anonymous calls telling him that they had seen Lucas, but none of them were real. The following days were filled with total desperation. José Carlos walked from street to street, knocking on doors accompanied by his son's friends. He went on television programs where he showed Lucas's photo and asked the population of Salvador for help to find him. Day and night, he continued through the streets and alleys, posting posters with the teenager's photograph. He continued visiting health centers in the city, and even though his strength was at the limit, he persisted in the search. The incessant search for his son ended after 12 days when he received a call from his son Felipe, who told him that the charred body found days ago was that of Lucas. Felipe recognized his brother by a lock of hair that had remained intact, and by the remains of his pants, shirt, underwear, and the double belt buckle Lucas was wearing the last time he was seen alive. Although the authorities still needed the results of DNA tests to confirm the victim's identity, the family was convinced it was Lucas. Upon receiving the news, José Carlos felt his heart accelerate. Then he ran out of air. He did not understand why or who had reasons to be so cruel to his son, as Lucas was loved by everyone. The body, burned at the Legal Medical Institute, was all that was left for his family. José Carlos went home in the midst of an emotional upheaval. He was desperate, anguished, and anesthetized by pain. He struggled to accept the terrible reality. The most difficult task was to tell Marian, Lucas's mother, that her son had died. Upon learning what had happened, Marian traveled from Italy to Brazil accompanied by her sister, Marilia. Her husband did not dare to go to the airport to pick them up because he felt responsible for the boy's death. Lucas's older brothers, Felipe and Carlos, went to pick up their mother, who was crying inconsolably. Marian said that losing her parents was losing the past, but losing a child was losing the future. On April 4th, José Carlos went to the police station to give his statements against Pastor Silvio. Some of Lucas's friends also testified, confirming the religious man's inappropriate behavior with the boy and that Lucas had gone with the pastor the day he disappeared. Silvio was interrogated but denied all the accusations, and provided contradictory versions about the last time he saw Lucas. Despite everything, the police refused to arrest him, and the pastor left the station calmly, smiling and mocking everyone. The crime shook the city, and within a few days, the news dominated 80% of the television coverage. The body remained in the morgue for 43 days until the DNA test, which took a long time, confirmed it was indeed Lucas. The forensic report revealed terrible details. First, there was an attempt at asphyxiation that did not work, evidenced by the fact that he had a piece of cloth in his mouth. It was later learned that he was burned alive, so charred that it was impossible to determine the exact cause of death or whether there was sexual abuse. Still shaken by the cruel details of his death, after completing all the legal processes, the parents received the body. Almost 2 months after the crime, they were able to give Lucas a Christian burial. The funeral was attended by family, friends, and people who loved Lucas. Numerous posters and banners with Lucas's photo remained scattered throughout Salvador de Bahia, a testament to his father's struggle. Lucas was buried in the Bosque da Paz cemetery. The case was investigated by the civil police, and expert reports determined that Lucas was gagged and his hands were tied with a piece of curtain fabric, similar to one found in the church of Rio Bermelo, making Pastor Silvio the main suspect in the homicide. The prosecutor's office suspected that Lucas had been a victim of rape. However, at the time, the technical police department did not detect sexual violence in the forensic analysis. In October 2001, the police investigation into the murder was concluded, and Silvio was identified as the perpetrator. Although the prosecutors requested his preventive detention, the judge did not consider it necessary, and the man continued the process in freedom. The measure adopted by the court, which already demonstrated the preferential treatment that the accused received, forced José Carlos to camp in front of the public ministry to demand justice. The family had to resort for months to organizations guaranteeing human rights, the Ministry of Justice, and even the United Nations in Switzerland to ensure that Lucas's murder would not go unpunished. José Carlos questioned the delay in the trial and also demanded an investigation into the sources of Pastor Silvio's financial resources, as he was defended by one of the most expensive lawyers in Brazil. After 3 consecutive years of fighting and hundreds of protests, in June 2004, the trial of Pastor Silvio was scheduled. According to the established facts, although the reasons were not completely clarified, the pastor repeatedly abused Lucas that night inside the Universal Church and then dragged him to an internal courtyard where he set him on fire while he was still alive. The court considered the crime a qualified triple homicide and accepted the public prosecutor's thesis that indicated he committed rape and then killed the teenager for passionate reasons. The main evidence in deciding the sentence were testimonies provided by 5 young friends of Lucas and members of the church. It should be noted that for telling the truth before the law, the boys were threatened by the ecclesiastical authorities and expelled from the temple. Even though the accused denied the murder and it was not possible to determine the exact motive or trigger for the crime, the jury decided there was sufficient evidence against him and declared him guilty on June 9th of that year. The court in the city of Salvador sentenced him to 23 years and 5 months in prison, which he had to serve in the Lemos Brito penitentiary. Despite the sentence, prosecutor Cleo Saboida said that for her, the case was not over, as she believed there were more people involved. Pastor Silvio's lawyers appealed the sentence issued in the first instance. In a first appeal, they managed to have the sentence reduced to 18 years in prison. In the next appeal, they lowered it to 15 years. 2 years later, in 2006, the now former pastor Silvio, accompanied by 7 lawyers, presented a new version of the events. On that occasion, he accused 3 other members of the church. Bishop Fernando Silva, Pastor Joel Miranda Machado, and his security manager Luis Claudio. According to Silvio's new testimony, Lucas was murdered because he had told him that he saw Pastor Joel and Bishop Fernando having sexual relations. When this detail was revealed, it exposed the movements that the church made to hide such acts. When their pastors committed these types of acts, they were not expelled, but rather transferred to other cities. In Fernando's case in 2001, he worked in the temple of Pituba, and after the crime, he led a church in Minas Gerais. Joel was the pastor of the Universal Church in Rio Bermelo, and after the homicide, he moved to Rio de Janeiro, where he ran a church. The statement was accepted by the prosecution. However, the legal representative of the new defendants claimed that Silvio's accusations were motivated by revenge, stating that Silvio was acting in retaliation since he had been expelled from the temple for inappropriate conduct against Lucas. In response to the lawyer's accusations, Silvio gave an interview while serving his sentence, stating that he had been subjected to strong psychological pressure, received death threats from a lawyer associated with the church, and was blackmailed to omit the facts of the crime. In October 2007, the Superior Court of Justice ordered that the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God must compensate Lucas's family with 1 million reais, around $204,000, for moral damages. The court established that the execution of the atrocious crime was only possible due to an attitude of cover-up by the religious institution. This negligence was not only due to the poor choice of its preaching members in the case of Silvio, but also because there was no surveillance over him. The decision was challenged by the defense of the church, alleging that Silvio was not working at the time the homicide occurred. However, the court held that Silvio had asked Lucas to stay longer in the temple, which belonged to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, and therefore the decision was maintained in favor of Vargas Terra's family. In February 2008, a case was opened against Bishop Fernando, who was detained in prison after being on the run for a time. A few months later, he was released on bail while awaiting his legal process. Pastor Joel remained on the run. In December of that same year, the church had to pay the family's compensation with interest, which amounted to approximately $407,000. That same month, after 4 years and 6 months of pressure, Silvio's lawyers managed to get him granted the benefit of the semi-open regime. In August 2009, Fernando and Joel received a habeas corpus granted by the First Chamber of the Supreme Federal Court. The case made headlines in the country's main newspapers, and a documentary was released that portrayed the crime, written and directed by Claudio Factum. Lucas's father dedicated all his financial resources and days of his life to ensure justice was served. He knew that a conviction would not change the cruel fate imposed on his son, but he believed it could offer some consolation to his memory if he could see the conviction of his murderers. The man and his family suffered death threats, but nothing was as strong as the pain of losing his son in such a cruel way and at the hands of supposed servants of God. The successive defeats in the courts disillusioned José Carlos and Marian. José Carlos even began a law course at a higher education institute in Salvador to better understand the procedures and bureaucracies of trials. However, he ended up disappointed and dropped out in his last semester when he realized the loopholes in Brazil's laws. In July 2012, after serving 7 years in a closed regime, a new judicial decision granted Silvio conditional freedom. The calvary of José Carlos and Marian continued for many more years. The trial against Bishop Fernando and Pastor Joel suffered all possible delays. In 2013, Judge Almeida acquitted the pastors due to lack of evidence, and Lucas's family appealed the decision. In an interview, José Carlos pointed out that after almost 12 years had passed since his son's death, only one of those responsible for the crime had been convicted, while the other two were free. In September 2015, the judges of the Court of Justice decided unanimously to send the religious figures to a popular jury, and the decision was confirmed by the Superior Court of Justice. However, the defense of the two accused appealed the court's decision, which was annulled in November 2018 by Minister Ricardo Lewandowski of the Supreme Federal Court, alleging a lack of evidence. In response, the Attorney General's office appealed the decision. Lucas's father continued his campaign to request a trial against the pastors with a popular jury, but an obstacle arose that exceeded legal challenges. José Carlos passed away on February 21, 2019. He was admitted to a hospital in Palmeudo with kidney failure and died of respiratory arrest. He was buried in the cemetery in the Nova Brasilia neighborhood in Salvador, alongside his son Lucas. His wife Marian noted that José Carlos was tired after so much time fighting for justice and believed that they had managed to silence his voice. She vowed to continue the fight until the guilty were punished, seeking even the slightest sense of justice. A second book in the Vargas Terra saga, Betrayed by Obedience, was published, with the first part released in 2016. The book was written by Lucas's parents and independently distributed. On May 1, 2019, the digital version was released on Amazon. In 2020, the Second Chamber of the Supreme Federal Court decided that the two accused pastors should go to a popular jury. Their defense claimed they were innocent and that there was no evidence against them. However, one of the lawyers for Lucas's family, Ricardo Sampaio, said that the prosecution had enough evidence to prove not only their involvement in Lucas's death, but also that they had committed statutory rape. After several delays, the trial finally began on April 25, 2023, in the Forum Rui Barbosa in Salvador. Both pastors were accused of triple qualified homicide and concealment of a corpse, with 3 aggravating factors: use of cruel means, the inability of the victim to defend himself, and the motive of passion. The Universal Church of the Kingdom of God established its position, pointing out that both religious figures were innocent, and hired lawyers Nestor Fernandez Tavora Neto and Nelson da Costa Barreto Neto to represent them. The jury was composed of 5 men and 2 women, and Judge Andrea Teixeira Lima Sarmento Neto was assigned to lead the debate. During the sessions, statements were heard from 15 witnesses, 5 on behalf of the prosecution and 10 for the defense. Prosecutors Ariomar José Figueiredo da Silva and David Gallo called several of Lucas's friends to the stand, who testified that Pastor Fernando had prohibited church workers from participating in the search for the adolescent. Even before confirmation of his death, they indicated that Lucas's girlfriend had been expelled from the temple and received threats. They also revealed that another pastor, Bel Jair de Sousa Santos, adopted a threatening tone to discourage initiatives to search for Lucas. The religious man, Jair, was the first witness called by the defense, but ended up contradicting himself in his statements. In his testimony before the jury, he stated that at that time he was living in Julio Cesar Park with Pastor Joel. However, the prosecution recalled that in a previous statement he said that he resided in a condominium on Parallel Avenue with only his wife. Another contradiction pointed out by the public ministry had to do with the relationship between Jair and the accused. In a statement given in 2008, the witness stated that he knew the pastors only by sight, but on the stand he declared that he lived with Joel. On the last day of the debate, the 2 accused gave their testimonies. The first to take the stand was Joel, who declared himself innocent and stated that he did not know Lucas before his disappearance was reported. He assured that he had no relationship or friendship with the 2 accused and that he was not homosexual. Fernando admitted knowing the teenager but denied his participation in the crime. During his intervention, He answered the judge's questions and assured that he had given Lucas the same treatment he had with other members of the church. He also stated that Lucas's father had looked for him when he noticed that his son had not arrived home, and he had given him all the information he had. The wives of the two religious men also took the stand and declared that they were with their husbands on the day Lucas disappeared. The defense asserted that their clients were innocent and that Lucas's murder was committed solely by Pastor Silvio, who had already been convicted. They did not deny the existence of a barbaric crime, but insisted that their clients were innocent and asked the judges not to confuse the certainty of the crime with the certainty of who committed it. For their part, the representative of the prosecution assured in his final arguments that both defendants were monsters who had taken the life of an innocent angel and deserved the full punishment of the law. Before the sentence was handed down, Lucas's mother, Marian, offered statements to the press. She said that she hoped justice would finally be served to end their 22-year-long cycle of grief. She warned that the fight had been difficult after so many years, but was counting the days and hours to hear the court's decision, which she hoped would be fair. She also regretted that Pastor Bel Jair of the Universal Church of Pituba would not appear in the process as one of the accused, since he had also helped the murderers cover up the crime. The mother recalled that Joel and Bel Jair were together when the murder occurred and pointed out that according to the reconstruction of events by the police chief, it was shown that the cloth used to gag and tie their son came from the church curtain. Finally, on April 27th, by the decision of the majority of the jury, the two pastors were sentenced to 21 years in prison for the murder of Lucas. According to Judge Andrea La, the base sentence for homicide was 18 years, with an additional 3 years due to the victim's inability to defend himself. Both would serve their sentences under a closed regime, but they did not go to jail immediately. Both Fernando and Joel could appeal the decision while remaining free because they appeared without resistance to the trial. The charge of hiding a corpse was excluded because it expired 4 years after the fact. Once the judge finished giving her statements and after the announcement of the sentence, the popular jury was dismissed, while the voices of Lucas's relatives could be heard shouting at the convicted pastors. The victim's mother declared that she was very happy with the decision, which she described as a victory not only for her, but for her entire family, especially her late husband, who fought tirelessly to obtain justice. She said she had lived through an ordeal waiting for justice, which arrived late after 22 years of impunity. She thanked the media for their support, as well as the entire community of Salvador de Bahia for accompanying them during all those years. The fact that Joel and Fernando were not imprisoned while the appeals were being made generated a lot of discontent. The media turned to experts to explain what happened and to reduce the public's frustration. One of those legal experts, Pablo Dominguez, explained that the accused could wait for the appeal in freedom since there was no final and firm sentence, and the Bahia Court of Justice understood that there were no reasons to demand their immediate arrest. Dominguez pointed out that according to the Brazilian Constitution, no one loses their status as innocent due to a conviction until it is confirmed by higher courts. Therefore, Joel and Fernando retained their status as innocent until all resources were exhausted. The murder of Lucas was the subject of several books and documentaries in the years following his death, and was classified as one of the most heinous and gruesome crimes in Brazil. To this day, people are still waiting for all the appeals in higher instances to determine whether these two pastors will remain in jail. Boys and girls, that's it for today's video, a very sad case. As we always say, it's reprehensible when such a young life is lost. Lucas was a boy who was simply following his religion, doing what he believed was good, and his parents thought the church was a safe place for him to spend time. It is very sad what happened to Lucas, and there are still many unanswered questions. We are still waiting for all the necessary appeals, but in the end, for the murder of Lucas, there are 3 convicted. This story has many hypotheses, nuances, and versions from each person involved. What is clear is that the people who were supposed to care for this teenager failed him. They did horrible things to him, and ultimately the guilty have been sentenced. Although Lucas's father could not see justice, we believe that wherever he is, he knows what happened in this case. If you found this video informative, remember to leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in another case. Goodbye.